The billionaire's cold, flat voice cut through the silence of the crowded boardroom. Pack your things. You are dismissed. Humiliated in front of every executive, the maid Denise Christensen bowed her head and turned toward the exit, but not before subtly leaving a single small envelope exactly where the allegedly stolen watch had sat. Nicholas Gavin was about to find out that the item he thought was stolen was nothing compared to the truth contained inside that white envelope, a truth that would instantly ruin his life. Denise stood at the edge of the conference room, her uniform spotless, her eyes low. She wasn't supposed to be here, not in a room of suits and silk ties, where her presence looked like a mistake. At the head of the room stood Nicholas Gavin, tall, composed, the billionaire who owned the building and every soul in it. The city skyline framed him like a crown, golden light spilling through the window behind him. "Whoever took it, speak now," he said, his voice calm, sharp, deliberate. The stolen object, a silver Gavin and Company watch, sat in the middle of the desk like a judge's gavel. No one spoke. Vivian, his sister, broke the silence with a low, practiced sigh. "We found her cleaning cart near your office door, Nick." No one else was there. A ripple of judgment passed through the room. Denise's heart hammered. She wanted to speak, to explain, but years of working under Vivian's scorn had taught her silence was safer. "Sir," she managed, voice trembling, "I didn't." "Enough," Nicholas cut in, his tone slicing through the air. "I will not tolerate theft in my home or my company." He didn't yell, he didn't need to. His calm authority was worse. The staff stared. Denise's throat burned with humiliation. She had scrubbed this man's floors, polished his marble desk, and whispered prayers for him when he fell ill last winter, and now he wouldn't even let her finish a sentence. "Pack your things," he said flatly. "You're dismissed." The words landed like a verdict. Denise bowed her head, whispering, "Yes, sir," before turning toward the door. Not one person stopped her. Behind her, Nicholas exhaled, forcing the tension from his shoulders. "Let this be a reminder," he said to his staff. "Trust is earned, not assumed." But the moment he said it, something in his chest twisted, a flicker of unease he couldn't quite name. Hours later, when the office had gone dark and silent, he noticed the envelope. It was small white, sitting exactly where the watch had been. His name written in careful handwriting. Inside was a photograph, a boy in a hospital bed, smiling faintly despite the wires around him. On his wrist, a hospital bracelet printed with the words Gavin Industries. Beneath it, a note. "He's the reason I stayed. Your decisions took his future, so I worked to give him one." Nicholas's breath caught. The letter slipped from his fingers. For the first time in years, the billionaire who thought he'd seen everything, felt something he didn't recognize. Shame. And that was the moment his walls began to crack. "Welcome back, my beautiful family and friends, to Mr. Crown Stories. If no one reminded you today, listen closely, you matter. You are seen. You are stronger than what tried to break you. This story is for the quiet souls who give everything and ask for nothing. For the ones like Denise, the helpers, the healers, the hearts that stay kind even when the world turns cold. It's for anyone who's ever been misunderstood, judged, or cast aside, only to rise again, not in anger but in grace. If this touches your heart, go ahead and click subscribe, type "I still believe in kindness" in the comments, and tell me where you're watching from. Because tonight's story is proof that even after betrayal and loss, redemption can still find you, and love can begin in the quietest act of compassion. So take a deep breath, my strong ones. You're not invisible. You're the reason hope still exists in this world. Now, let's begin. Morning sunlight spilled through the floor-to-ceiling windows of Gavin Tower, slicing the silence of Nicholas's office into pale shards. The city below was already alive, horns blaring, phones ringing, deals being made, but up here, everything felt still. Cold. Lifeless. Nicholas sat behind his desk, the same desk where Denise Christensen had stood just 24 hours ago, her eyes lowered, her voice trembling as she tried to defend herself. He could still hear the faint echo of her words, "Sir, I didn't," before he cut her off. Now, her envelope lay open beside his computer, the photograph still there. A boy with tired eyes and a soft smile stared up at him from a hospital bed. The white wristband on the boy's arm read Gavin Industries, Patient Care Fund. It mocked him every time he looked at it. He should have thrown it away. Burned it. Forgotten her. But he couldn't. Nicholas tried to bury himself in work, quarterly reports, merger updates, shareholder letters, yet every page blurred into the same meaningless lines. His pen tapped rhythmically against the wood. The tick of his expensive wristwatch filled the silence. Time moved. He didn't. A soft knock came at the door. "Come in," he said without looking up. Vivian swept in, her heels clicking like punctuation marks across the marble floor. She was elegance dressed in cruelty, the kind of woman who could smile while twisting a knife. "You didn't come down for breakfast," she said, setting her tablet on his desk. "I assumed you were still stewing over the Maid situation." Nicholas's jaw tightened. Her name was Denise. Vivian raised an eyebrow. "Was? You make it sound like she's dead." She perched on the edge of a leather chair. "Honestly, Nick, you did the right thing. The staff needed to be reminded who runs this house. We can't have people thinking they're family." He glanced at her, his voice low and flat. "She worked here for 3 years. And..." Vivian crossed one leg over the other, a faint smile curving her lips. "So did the gardener who stole company property last year. You didn't lose sleep over him. This isn't the same." "Oh please," she scoffed. "You're letting guilt cloud your judgment again. That woman was a maid, Nicholas, a replaceable employee. You can hire another one before dinner." He didn't answer. Vivian tilted her head, watching him closely. "Don't tell me this is about that pathetic note she left. You actually read it?" Nicholas's eyes flicked to the envelope on his desk. "Yes." She sighed. "Of course you did. You always have a soft spot for sob stories. It's one of your biggest flaws." Nicholas's patience snapped. His hand came down hard on the desk, making her flinch. "Enough, Vivian." For a second, the mask of control cracked, anger flashing like lightning behind his calm expression. Vivian rose slowly, smoothing her skirt. "Fine," she said coolly. "But don't say I didn't warn you. Empathy doesn't look good on a Gavin." When she left, the silence returned, heavier this time, pressing against his chest. Nicholas leaned back in his chair, exhaling slowly. His reflection in the window looked like a stranger. "Empathy doesn't look good on a Gavin," he repeated under his breath. Maybe that was the problem. That evening, as the city lights flickered to life, Henry, the old driver, knocked quietly before stepping in. He carried a tray with Nicholas's usual dinner, steak untouched, a glass of bourbon untouched beside it. "Sir," Henry said softly, setting the tray down. "You didn't eat again." Nicholas rubbed his temples. "Not hungry." Henry hesitated, his hands clasped behind his back. The man had been with the Gavins for decades, loyal but never intrusive. Still tonight, there was something unspoken in his eyes. "Sir, may I speak freely?" Nicholas nodded, too tired to argue. Henry shifted his weight. "About Miss Christensen." Nicholas's shoulders stiffened, but he didn't interrupt. "She was a hard worker," Henry continued. "Never complained, never caused trouble. But she worked like someone carrying the world on her back." He paused, his voice softening. "Not everyone who serves you does it for the paycheck, sir. That girl, she worked like someone paying off a promise." Nicholas looked up slowly, meeting the old man's gaze. "A promise?" Henry nodded. "Yes, sir. I once saw her cleaning after midnight, said she couldn't sleep knowing she hadn't finished her tasks. She told me she owed this house more than it owed her. I didn't understand it then, but now," he trailed off, eyes flicking to the envelope on the desk. Nicholas followed his gaze. The photograph stared back at him. "You knew her well?" he asked quietly. Henry gave a small smile. "No, sir. But I knew her kind. The kind who gives everything, even when no one notices." Nicholas leaned forward, elbows on his desk, his hands clasped together. "Thank you, Henry." The old driver nodded and left without another word. Hours passed. The office darkened, the only light now coming from the city skyline outside. Nicholas's desk was cluttered with papers, but his attention remained fixed on one file, Denise Christensen's employee record. He pulled it from the cabinet and opened it slowly. Name, Denise Marie Christensen. Position, housekeeper, primary residence. Start date, 3 years prior. Performance notes, exemplary. Punctual. Reliable. Disciplinary actions. None. No marks, no complaints, no faults. He flipped to the last page, emergency contact information. His eyes paused on the name. Leo Christensen. Relation, younger brother. Address, St. Mary's Pediatric Hospital, Ward 5B. The same name printed on the wristband in the photograph. Nicholas sat back, the truth dawning slowly, painfully. Denise hadn't been stealing. She'd been surviving. Working to keep someone alive. He opened his desk drawer, pulling out the photograph again. The boy's frail smile suddenly carried weight, a whole story he hadn't cared to see. The note echoed in his mind, "He's the reason I stayed." He looked at her neat handwriting, the careful curve of each letter. This wasn't written out of bitterness. It was written out of love. Out of exhaustion. Out of quiet dignity. Nicholas swallowed hard, guilt thick in his throat. For years, he'd prided himself on efficiency, on running an empire without emotion. But for the first time, that same empire felt rotten. He turned the photograph over. On the back, faint pencil marks read, "For when you forget they're real people." Nicholas's breath caught. He closed the file slowly and leaned back in his chair, staring at the ceiling as the city hummed beneath him. The walls of his glass office had always felt like a fortress. Tonight, they felt like a cage. For the first time, Nicholas Gavin wasn't thinking about profit margins or shareholders. He was thinking about a girl in a faded uniform who had stood in front of him, trembling but unbroken, and a boy whose future he'd stolen without ever knowing his name. The clock ticked softly on his wrist. Every second that passed felt like judgment. Finally he spoke, to no one, to the empty room, to himself. "What kind of promise were you keeping, Denise?" The question hung in the air long after he stopped speaking, unanswered and unrelenting. Outside, the city lights shimmered against the glass, but for Nicholas, the night had never felt darker. Nicholas whispers, almost to himself, "What kind of promise were you keeping, Denise?" The morning began like any other, the skyline of the city glowing pale gold through the tinted windows of Nicholas Gavin's car. But for the first time in years, he wasn't heading to a boardroom or a shareholders' meeting. He told no one where he was going. Not Vivian, not his assistant, not even Henry. The GPS led him away from the glass towers and pristine avenues of downtown, down into the older part of the city, a place he hadn't seen since he was a young executive trying to prove himself. The streets grew narrower, dirtier, the air heavier. Outside, the sky was washed in gray. When the car finally stopped, Nicholas looked out the window and saw the sign, St. Mary's Pediatric Hospital. He stepped out, the smell of antiseptic and rain hanging in the air. Inside, everything was quiet, too quiet. The kind of silence that held stories in it. Nurses moved quickly down the hallways, their soft shoes whispering against the linoleum floors. Children's drawings, rainbows, stick figures, lopsided hearts, were taped to the walls like small fragments of hope. Nicholas walked to the front desk. "I'm looking for a patient," he said. "Leo Christensen." The nurse at the counter typed something into her computer. "He's in Ward 5B, she said. "Are you family?" He hesitated. "No. Just someone who needs to understand something." The nurse studied him for a moment, but didn't press. She gave him directions, and he made his way down the hall. Ward 5B was small. The air smelled faintly of disinfectant and paper flowers. And there, through the glass window, he saw the boy from the photograph. Thinner now, his hair cropped short, an oxygen tube resting under his nose. A woman in scrubs sat beside him, reading aloud from a picture book. Leo laughed softly at something she said, a fragile sound, but genuine. Nicholas stood still, watching through the glass, feeling something inside him tighten. He asked a nearby nurse, "What's his condition?" The nurse's expression softened. "Chronic pulmonary fibrosis," she said quietly. "Severe lung scarring from chemical exposure. He's been here on and off for years. Brave kid though. Always smiles for his sister." Nicholas's breath caught. His sister. "Denise," the nurse said. "She's here almost every day after her shifts. Sweet girl. You wouldn't believe the hours she keeps just to afford his treatment." Denise. The name hit harder than he expected. Nicholas turned away from the window, the walls suddenly closing in around him. How did he get this?" he asked, though part of him already knew. The nurse frowned slightly. It happened years ago, when that old manufacturing plant shut down. The one that had those chemical leaks? A lot of families got sick from it. The boy's father used to work there before it closed. The sister mentioned it once. Nicholas felt his pulse slow, then quicken again. That plant. His plant. The one he'd closed to streamline operations. He remembered the press conference, the scripted speech about necessary cost reduction and economic strategy. He remembered the protests, the letters, the reports of exposure, the names of workers who'd begged for compensation. And he remembered signing the papers that silenced them. Now one of those names had a face, and that face belonged to the woman he'd fired in front of a room full of people. Nicholas left the hospital in a daze. Rain had started to fall, light, steady, cleansing, but it did nothing to wash away the nausea rising in his chest. He drove without thinking, his hands gripping the steering wheel as though the road itself might dissolve beneath him. At a red light, his phone buzzed, a notification from his company's archival system. He'd sent a request to access old HR records that morning, searching for anything connected to the Christensen name. The file appeared. He scrolled through quickly, termination reports, debt settlements, closure agreements. Then he stopped. Employee, Eric Christensen. Position, chemical operator. Termination date, 3 years ago, the same month the factory shut down. Cause of death, cardiac arrest secondary to respiratory complications. Dependent survivors, Denise Christensen, daughter, Leo Christensen, minor son. Nicholas stared at the screen, the car idling in the rain. It was all there, buried under paperwork, hidden behind legal phrasing and economic logic. His company had killed that man, in every way that mattered. And now the daughter he'd unknowingly condemned had spent 3 years scrubbing his floors, polishing his glass trophies, and smiling for a house that didn't deserve her. He closed his eyes. His chest felt tight, not from anger this time, but from shame. Across town, in a small corner diner tucked between a laundromat and a hardware store, Denise Christensen wiped down a table, her motions methodical, practiced. The bell above the door chimed with each customer, the smell of coffee and fried food lingering in the air. She wore a plain gray uniform now, no crisp apron, no mansion, no marble floors. But for the first time in years, she didn't have to keep her head bowed when she worked. On her phone, a video call flickered to life. Leo's face appeared on the screen, pale but smiling. "Hey you," Denise said softly, crouching beside the counter. "Did you finish your book?" "Almost," he said, his voice faint but bright. "The nurse says I might get to go home next month if I keep improving." "That's wonderful," she said, forcing her smile not to tremble. "You're stronger than all of us, you know that?" He laughed weakly. "Are you eating enough, Dee?" She looked down at her untouched plate of fries. "Always," she lied. "Don't lie," Leo teased. "Mom used to say you skip meals when you're sad." Denise blinked back tears. Mom was too smart for her own good. The connection crackled. "Dee, when I get out, we'll go to the park again, okay? Like before." "Okay," she whispered. "Promise." The screen went dark as the nurse ended the call for Leo's rest. Denise sat there for a long time, staring at her reflection in the black screen. She wasn't angry anymore. Just tired. Tired of running, of hiding, of pretending that life had been fair. Back in his car, Nicholas pulled over near the outskirts of the city, near where the old factory once stood. The building was gone now, replaced by empty lots and overgrown grass. Only a rusted gate remained, half collapsed, with the faint letters Gavin Manufacturing still visible through the rust. He stepped out, the rain soaking through his coat. The ground was muddy, the air thick with the ghost of old chemicals. He could almost hear the echo of machines, the distant voices of workers, men like Eric Christensen, laughing, coughing, living. And somewhere among them, a young girl might have waited outside, bringing her father lunch, believing the world was safe and fair. Nicholas closed his eyes. His hand rested on the gate. "I took everything from her," he muttered, voice breaking. "And she still worked to give something back." Thunder rumbled low in the distance, like the earth itself agreeing with him. He stood there for a while, letting the rain wash over him until his reflection shimmered faintly in the puddles, and for a fleeting moment, it merged with hers in his memory. Denise, quiet, resolute, unbroken. The woman he'd erased from his world had become the only one who could make him see it clearly again. As Nicholas drove away, the rain streaked down the car windows, blurring his reflection into hers. "I took everything from her," he whispered again. "And she still worked to give something back." Nicholas hadn't slept. The city outside his penthouse glittered like a field of diamonds, but he saw none of it. His mind replayed the image of Denise's brother, the oxygen tube, the quiet courage in his small face. Every heartbeat was a reminder of the debt he could never repay. By dawn, Nicholas was back in his office, not the one at home, but the heart of Gavin Industries, the empire he'd built brick by brick. The air smelled faintly of coffee and money. The kind of place where guilt didn't belong. But this morning, it hung heavy. He sat at his desk, eyes scanning the glowing screen before him. He'd ordered IT to unlock every archived email connected to the mansion staff, 3 years' worth of correspondence buried beneath corporate efficiency. As line after line of text appeared, Nicholas scrolled slowly, his chest tightening. Most of it was routine: cleaning schedules, supply orders, maintenance requests. But then, an email stood out. From Denise Christensen to HR Household Division subject, unpaid leave request. He clicked it open. "Dear HR, I am requesting unpaid leave for 2 weeks to care for my mother, who has fallen critically ill. I will make arrangements to ensure my duties are covered and will return immediately once she is stable. Thank you for understanding, Denise Christensen." Nicholas frowned. There was no reply thread. No acknowledgement. Nothing. He searched again, this time for HR side of the exchange, and there it was, hidden in a separate internal folder marked Administrative Review. The message was short. "Leave request denied. Non-essential personnel. Maid duties can be reassigned. She can reapply if she's still employed in 3 months. Signed by Vivian Gavin." Nicholas stared at the signature for a long time, his jaw tightening. Vivian had always been thorough, controlling even, but this was different. This was cruelty disguised as policy. He leaned back in his chair, rubbing his temples. It wasn't just that the request had been denied, it had been buried. He checked the digital metadata, deleted permanently 48 hours after submission. Deleted by Vivian. His hand tightened into a fist. He stood abruptly, crossing to the large wooden filing cabinet in the corner of the office, one of the few pieces that had survived from his father's era. The drawers creaked as he opened them, the scent of paper and ink filling the air. Nicholas began flipping through personnel files, alphabetically at first, then impatiently, until he found it. Christensen, Denise. Her file was thin. Too thin. He opened it on the desk, scanning through every page. Employment forms. Work evaluations. Tax slips. Then, tucked near the back, a bundle of small handwritten notes. At first, he thought they were complaints. But when he unfolded one, his throat went dry. "Miss Christensen helped me when I fell ill last winter. She covered my shift and never asked for credit. Housekeeper, Clara Jensen. Always on time. Polite. Never leaves a room half done, even when it's late. Groundskeeper, Samuel R. When the boy was scared during the thunderstorm, she sang to him until he fell asleep. Driver, Henry Grant." Nicholas ran his hand over the papers as if they might dissolve. Every word was proof that the woman he'd accused of theft had been the quiet backbone of his home, the one person holding his fractured household together. A sudden knock broke the silence. "Come in," he said, voice low. Vivian entered, perfectly dressed as always, her heels clicking against the marble floor. "You wanted to see me?" she asked with polite disinterest. Nicholas didn't answer immediately. He turned his monitor toward her, the HR email glowing on the screen. Her expression flickered, then smoothed. "What about it?" "You buried her leave request," Nicholas said quietly. Vivian shrugged, stepping closer. "It wasn't buried. It was handled. She's a maid, Nicholas. They come and go. You don't pause the household every time one of them has a family issue." "She wasn't asking for sympathy," he replied, his tone even but sharp. "She asked for time, unpaid. You didn't even bother to tell her no to her face." Vivian's painted lips curved into a smirk. "She's replaceable. They all are. You of all people should understand efficiency." Nicholas's eyes lifted to hers. The calm in them was cold, unnerving. Is that what you call it? Efficiency. Vivian's confidence wavered. I was protecting you. This family. You think people like her don't talk? A maid begging for leave, it looks weak. It invites gossip. You can't afford sentiment when you're who you are. Nicholas rose from his chair. His height, his presence, everything about him filled the room. But his voice, when he spoke, was almost a whisper. I built this company on numbers and names, he said. But I forgot that names belong to people. People like her. People you decided were disposable. Vivian's smirk faltered, replaced by the faintest edge of unease. You're overreacting. It's one employee. One employee I publicly humiliated because of your negligence, Nicholas snapped, the word negligence cutting through the air like a blade. One woman who worked harder than any of us ever have, and you erased her because she didn't matter to your image. Vivian stiffened. You can't speak to me like that. I'm your sister. Nicholas's voice dropped lower. Then start acting like it. The silence that followed was suffocating. Vivian shifted, crossing her arms. So what now? You're going to go play savior? Bring her back? Give the maid her crown. Her tone dripped with sarcasm. Nicholas turned away from her, opening his drawer and sliding Denise's handwritten commendations back inside, carefully, reverently. I'm going to find the truth, he said. All of it. He pressed the intercom button on his desk. Security, he said. A voice crackled through. Yes, Mr. Gavin? Pull every camera feed from the day the watch went missing. Every angle. Every hallway. Vivian's head snapped up. Nicholas, that's unnecessary. Do it, he said, his tone leaving no room for argument. When he turned back to his sister, his expression was unreadable. You should go home, Vivian. Get some rest. Her jaw clenched. You'll regret this. You're letting guilt cloud your judgment. No, Nicholas said softly, his gaze steady. For the first time in my life, I'm seeing clearly. Vivian opened her mouth to reply, but the ice in his eyes silenced her. She turned sharply on her heel and left the office, the echo of her heels fading into the hallway. When the door closed, Nicholas exhaled slowly and sank into his chair. He reached for Denise's file again, his fingers brushing over the small worn photo clipped to the first page, her staff ID. Her smile was faint, polite, as though she knew her worth would never be seen there. He whispered to the empty room, You deserved better than all of us. Then he looked up at the security camera feed still loading on his monitor. Somewhere in those hours of silent footage lay the truth, not just about the missing watch, but about the woman who had worked in the shadows of his empire. Nicholas leaned forward, eyes hardening with resolve. Let's see what really happened. The screen flickered as the first footage began to play, grainy, silent, but full of answers. Nicholas's voice was low, almost a promise. This time, I'll see what I was too blind to before. The office was dark except for the pale blue glow of the computer screen. Rain lashed against the glass walls of Gavin Tower, each drop catching the reflection of a man who no longer recognized himself. Nicholas Gavin sat in his leather chair, sleeves rolled to his elbows, eyes fixed on the grainy security footage that filled the monitor. He'd told security to send him everything, every camera feed from the day of the accusation. Now, hours past midnight, he was finally watching. At first, there was nothing. Just silence. Empty hallways. Employees passing through like ghosts. Then the timestamp reached 9:42 a.m. The office door opened, and there she was. Denise Christensen, dressed in her plain navy uniform, her hair tied neatly back, her posture as careful as her movements. She entered quietly, pushing her cleaning cart with one hand and humming faintly under her breath. Nicholas leaned forward. The sound had no audio, but he could almost hear it, that soft hum she always carried when she thought no one was around. A melody for the silence. She began dusting the bookshelves, adjusting frames, polishing the glass tabletop. Every motion was deliberate, almost reverent. Then, at 9:56, she reached the desk. She wiped its surface, rearranged the pens, then paused, noticing the watch sitting near the edge. Nicholas's pulse quickened. He'd assumed she took it. Everyone had. But in the footage, Denise only looked at the watch, hesitated, and carefully slid it to the far corner, safe from falling. Then she picked up her cloth and kept cleaning. No hesitation. No theft. No guilt. Just diligence. He fast-forwarded. 10:13 a.m., Vivian entered. Her movements were sharp, confident, her phone pressed to her ear. She paced as she spoke, gesturing animatedly with one hand while the other rested on the desk, right beside the watch. Nicholas's breath caught. Vivian reached into her purse, rummaged for a pen, then, distracted mid-call, set the watch inside by mistake. She didn't even glance at it. A careless, unconscious motion. Then she turned and left. Nicholas froze the frame. There it was, undeniable, unaltered truth. The watch had never been stolen. The accusation had been built on his own sister's thoughtlessness, and his own blindness. He rewound the footage once. Then again. And again. By the third replay, his hands trembled. The image blurred through tears he didn't notice forming until they dropped onto the desk below. He pressed his palms over his face, his voice barely a whisper. God, what have I done? The question hung in the dim air, unanswered. For a long time, Nicholas just sat there, the rhythmic hum of the rain outside merging with the hollow sound of his breathing. He saw in his mind the moment he'd stood before the staff that morning. The look on Denise's face when he'd accused her. The silence that followed. The way she'd said, "Yes, sir," like surrendering a piece of her soul to survive one more humiliation. And now the truth. Nicholas pushed away from his desk, pacing the floor. His reflection in the dark window followed him, tall, proud, broken. He'd always believed himself fair, decisive, efficient. But tonight, he realized something far worse than error. He'd become the kind of man his father warned him about. A man who measured people only by usefulness. He turned back to the screen, where Denise's figure still moved, wiping, arranging, quietly humming, the last trace of innocence he'd crushed without hesitation. The intercom on his desk blinked softly. He pressed the button. Security. Yes, sir. Get me Henry Grant's number. Now. Within minutes, the call connected. A groggy voice answered, "Mr. Gavin?" Nicholas's tone was low but steady. "Henry. I need you to find her." "Miss Christensen?" "Yes. I don't care where she is, the diner, a friend's house, wherever. Find her, Henry. Tonight." There was a pause on the line. "Understood, sir. I'll start right away." Nicholas ended the call but didn't move. The rain outside had softened into a steady drizzle, the kind that blurred the world into something gentler, or lonelier. He sat back down, reached for a pen, and pulled out a sheet of his personal stationery. The paper bore his embossed initials, NG, crisp and perfect, like the man he'd pretended to be. He hesitated, then began to write. "Denise. I don't expect forgiveness. I don't deserve it. You gave years of your life to a house that never saw you, and I repaid you with humiliation. You showed grace where I showed arrogance. Dignity where I gave none. I can't undo what I did that morning. But I want you to know, I see you now. Nicholas Gavin." He stared at the words for a long time. They looked small. Inadequate. Too clean for the damage they were meant to atone for. Nicholas set down the pen, folded the note once, and slid it into an envelope. He wrote her name on the front in the same deliberate handwriting she had once used on her letter to him. Denise Christensen. He turned it over in his hands, his thumb tracing the edge of the paper. For a brief moment, he considered calling Henry back, asking him to deliver it once she was found. But something in him hesitated. Apologies meant nothing without the courage to say them face to face. With a quiet exhale, Nicholas placed the letter on his desk beside the monitor, beside the paused image of Denise cleaning the office she'd once been fired from. He sat there, staring at the two symbols side by side, the truth he'd uncovered, and the apology he still couldn't bring himself to send. The clock on the wall ticked softly. 1:37 a.m. Nicholas leaned back in his chair, exhaustion pulling at him, guilt rooting deep. For the first time in years, the office that had always felt like his fortress seemed like a confessional, the walls holding the echoes of everything he'd refused to hear. He glanced one last time at the screen. Denise was bending to pick up something, a photo frame that had fallen off the shelf. She smiled faintly, brushed off the dust, and placed it back perfectly centered before leaving the room. Nicholas felt the smallest, strangest ache at the sight, as if that single gentle act said everything she'd never spoken aloud. "Thank you," he murmured to the empty air, "for caring for a house that never cared for you." The rain fell harder again, a quiet percussion against the windows, washing the city clean. Nicholas stood, straightened the papers on his desk, and turned off the monitor. The office plunged into darkness, save for the faint light of the street lamps below. He looked once more at the envelope resting there, a confession with no receiver, and whispered tomorrow. But even he knew it wasn't a promise. Just a hope. As he left the office, the soft echo of his footsteps followed him down the marble hallway, a billionaire haunted not by what he'd lost, but by what he'd finally learned to see. Back in the empty office, the envelope remained untouched. A single note, written but unsent, the apology of a man learning too late that silence can be louder than any words. The cafe was small, the kind of place no billionaire had reason to visit. Its walls were lined with old photographs and mismatched chairs, the air thick with the scent of coffee and rain-soaked pavement. Outside, the city still glistened from last night's storm, the streets reflecting fragments of light like broken glass. Nicholas Gavin sat in the corner booth, his coat draped over the seat beside him, trying to disappear into the anonymity of ordinary life. He hadn't been in a place like this in years, a place where no one cared who he was, where the hum of quiet conversations filled the air instead of boardroom chatter. The door chimed softly. He looked up. There she was. Denise Christensen, her hair tied in a loose bun, sleeves rolled to her elbows, apron slightly frayed. She balanced a tray in her hands as she moved between tables, offering polite smiles that never reached her eyes. She hadn't seen him yet. Nicholas's chest tightened. The last time he'd seen her, she was standing in his office surrounded by judgment, his judgment. Now she was here, in a place far removed from marble floors and glass towers, yet somehow she still carried herself with the same quiet grace. When she finally turned and saw him, her steps faltered. The tray trembled slightly in her hands. Their eyes met for the first time since that morning. "Nicholas Gavin," she said softly, disbelief laced with something colder, caution. "You shouldn't be here." "I needed to be," he replied, his voice low, controlled, but not commanding this time. For a long moment, neither spoke. Then, with a quiet professionalism that masked the storm in her eyes, Denise approached his table. "What can I get you?" "Coffee," he said. "Black." She nodded and turned away, her hand steady though her pulse raced. The other staff whispered behind the counter, recognizing the billionaire who had no business sitting among them. Nicholas waited, his fingers tracing the edge of a photograph inside his coat pocket. He'd held it for days, the same one she'd left on his desk, the boy's faint smile frozen in time. When she returned with his coffee, she set it down carefully. "It's on the house," she murmured. He looked at her, guilt heavy in his gaze. "You don't owe me that." "No," she said, her voice barely above a whisper. "I don't." For a moment, the only sound was the hiss of the espresso machine and the quiet murmur of customers. Then Nicholas reached into his pocket and placed the photograph on the table between them. "I saw what you left on my desk," he said. "And I saw the truth." Denise froze, her breath catching as her eyes fell on the photo. Her younger brother, Leo, his fragile body swallowed by hospital sheets, the medical band around his wrist bearing the logo Gavin Industries. Her hand trembled slightly as she picked it up. "You shouldn't have come here," she whispered again. "Maybe not," Nicholas said, his tone softer now. "But I had to." She looked at him then, truly looked. Gone was the ruthless executive she remembered. The man across from her seemed older, stripped of arrogance, burdened by something that couldn't be measured in money or power. "If you came to ease your conscience," she said finally, "don't. I've made peace with it." Nicholas shook his head. "I haven't." He leaned forward, his voice barely audible over the clinking cups. "When I fired you, I told myself I was defending integrity. But I wasn't. I was defending pride, and I mistook that for justice." Denise's throat tightened. "You think words will fix it? The humiliation? The job my father lost when your company shut down the factory? The years I spent cleaning the home of the man who ruined us?" Her voice didn't rise, but each word struck with quiet precision. Nicholas didn't flinch. He deserved every one of them. "I know," he said quietly. "That's why I'm here. To tell you I saw more than the photograph. I saw you, what I ignored, what I refused to see." Denise blinked rapidly, struggling between anger and something else, disbelief, maybe. He continued, his tone breaking for the first time. You gave dignity to a house that didn't deserve it. And I took that from you. Silence stretched between them. A group of customers left, and the door chimed again. Outside, the light shifted, softer, filtered through the clouds. Finally, Denise exhaled, her shoulders lowering slightly. Why now? She asked. Why come back after all this time? Nicholas hesitated. The real answer was tangled, guilt, remorse, a longing for redemption he didn't fully understand. Because I found something else, he said. A letter. From my father. Her brow furrowed, but she said nothing. Nicholas reached into his coat pocket again and pulled out a folded, yellowed sheet of paper. It was buried in our archives. Dated 3 months before the factory closed. He wrote it after a board meeting, one I was too busy to attend. I thought it was about business. It wasn't. He unfolded the letter carefully, his voice quiet as he read aloud. Nicholas, the true weight of wealth isn't how much you can earn, it's how much pain you cause by not paying attention. If we ever forget that our employees are people first, then we've already destroyed everything we're trying to build. He looked up at her. I never read it until now. Denise's eyes glistened. And now? Now I understand what he meant. For a long moment, neither spoke. The noise of the cafe faded, replaced by the quiet hum of realization. She looked down at the photograph again, Leo's frail smile frozen in time, then back at the man sitting before her. You can't undo the past, she said softly. No, Nicholas admitted. But I can face it. Publicly. Honestly. For once. Her eyes widened slightly. You're going to tell them? I have to. His voice was steady, resolute. You're not the first person my decisions have hurt. But maybe I can make sure you're the last. He stood, leaving a folded bill beneath his untouched coffee, not as payment, but as quiet respect. Denise followed him with her eyes, her lips parting as if to stop him, but no words came. At the door, Nicholas paused and turned back. Rainlight streaked across the windowpane behind him, framing him like a man half in shadow, half in redemption. You said you made peace with it, he said quietly. Maybe one day, I'll learn to do the same. Then he was gone. Denise remained still for a long while, her hands resting on the table, her reflection trembling faintly in the coffee's dark surface. She touched the photograph again, her thumb brushing over Leo's wristband, the emblem of the company that had both ruined and perhaps redeemed a man. Outside, Nicholas walked toward his car, the city air cold against his skin. He slipped his father's letter back into his pocket, its words echoing like a heartbeat. If we ever forget their people first. He'd forgotten. But not anymore. That night, in his office, he sat before his computer, staring at the blank document on the screen. For years, his name had commanded markets and headlines. Tomorrow, it would stand for something else. An apology. To the workers. To the families. To the maid who had seen humanity where he had seen hierarchy. He typed slowly, deliberately, each word a small atonement. A man's worth is not measured by what he builds, but by how he treats those who build for him. As the city lights glimmered beyond the glass, Nicholas pressed save and leaned back in his chair. For the first time in years, he didn't feel powerful, but he felt human. Nicholas looked at his father's letter one last time and whispered, "You were right." Then he made a decision no Gavin before him ever had, to stand before the world, not as a billionaire seeking profit, but as a man seeking forgiveness. The conference room felt different that morning. Not because the glass walls gleamed brighter or because the air smelled of polished mahogany and espresso, but because the man standing at the head of the room was no longer the same. Nicholas Gavin adjusted the cuffs of his suit jacket, his reflection glinting faintly in the mirrored surface of the table. The same room. The same staff. The same silence. Only this time, the silence didn't serve his authority, it exposed it. The last time he stood here, he had fired a woman in front of everyone, a woman whose only crime had been honesty. Now, he was here to undo what pride had done. Vivian swept in with her usual air of superiority, her perfume trailing like smoke. She gave him a polished smile, mistaking the tension in the room for anticipation. "I heard you called everyone in early," she said lightly, taking her place near him. "Let me guess, we're restructuring?" Or finally naming a new head of operations? Nicholas didn't answer. He simply looked at her, a long, unreadable look that made the corners of her smile falter. "Everyone's here," one of the assistants said quietly. Nicholas nodded. "Good." He turned to face the rows of employees, secretaries, accountants, janitors, and executives alike. The same faces that had watched in silence when he condemned Denise. And for a moment, they saw something strange in their employer's expression: vulnerability. "Before we begin," Nicholas said, his voice low but clear, "I need to say something." The room went still. Vivian folded her arms, feigning composure. "Nicholas, we can handle business later. If this is about last week's numbers." He raised a hand, silencing her. "No. This isn't about business. It's about integrity." The word lingered like a challenge. He took a step forward. 3 weeks ago, I made a decision that I believed was right. I stood in this very room and accused someone of stealing from me. His gaze swept across the crowd, searching, steady. I fired her without proof, without compassion, and without listening. A murmur ran through the staff. Vivian's expression twitched. Nicholas's tone softened. Her name was Denise Christensen. Whispers rippled again: guilt, curiosity, recognition. Vivian laughed lightly, breaking the tension. "Nicholas, is this really necessary?" That Maid embarrassed the family name. "You handled it perfectly." Nicholas turned his head slowly toward her. His stare was cold, deliberate. "No, Vivian," he said. "You handled it." Her lips parted in surprise. He pressed a button on the remote in his hand. The lights dimmed slightly, and the massive screen behind him flickered to life. Grainy security footage filled the display, the inside of his office, the day of the so-called theft. There was Denise, quietly cleaning the desk, placing files in neat stacks. Then Vivian appeared, phone pressed to her ear, setting the luxury watch on the corner of the desk. Then, absent-mindedly, slipping it into her own purse mid-conversation. The footage ended. No one breathed. Nicholas turned back toward the room. "That," he said quietly, "is what I failed to see." Vivian's face went pale. "This is absurd. That could have been enough." The single word cut sharper than a blade. Nicholas looked around the room, his voice trembling with conviction now. "I made a mistake," he said. "I condemned an innocent woman to protect my pride. And I let my silence become cruelty." The staff exchanged uneasy glances. Some lowered their eyes, ashamed. Nicholas exhaled slowly and gestured toward the door. "You can come in now." The door opened quietly. Denise stood there, hesitant, almost ghost-like in her plain blue uniform. Her hands were folded neatly in front of her, her eyes uncertain. A hush fell over the room. Nicholas stepped toward her, his tone breaking. "The only thief here was me." His voice trembled but didn't waver. "I stole her dignity when she deserved my gratitude." For a long moment, no one spoke. The only sound was the hum of the city beyond the glass. Then Nicholas continued, turning to the staff. "Let this be a lesson, not about theft, but about arrogance. The kind that makes us blind to decency when it's standing right in front of us." He looked at Denise again. "Miss Christensen, I can't undo what I did to you. But I can start making it right." He turned back to the employees. "Effective immediately, Denise Christensen is reinstated with full benefits, and a promotion to House Operations Supervisor." The crowd murmured, stunned. Vivian finally snapped, her composure cracking. "You can't be serious. You're making a spectacle out of this. Over a maid." Nicholas's gaze hardened. "You're right," he said. "It is a spectacle of humility. Something this company has lacked for far too long." He paused, then added, "And as for you, Vivian." Her jaw tightened. "What?" "You're dismissed. Effective immediately." The room erupted in whispers. Vivian's voice sharpened. "You'd fire your own sister over her?" Nicholas's tone was calm, almost sorrowful. "No. I'm firing you for who you've become, and who I allowed you to be." Vivian's cheeks flushed with fury. "You'll regret this." He met her glare evenly. "No," he said softly. "What I regret, I already did." She spun on her heel and stormed out, her heels clicking sharply against the floor. The door slammed behind her, leaving an uneasy quiet. Nicholas turned back to the staff, his voice low and resolute. No one here is above accountability. Not even me. Especially not me. He looked at Denise once more. You have my apology, not just in words, but in action. You kept this house running when I forgot what a home even meant. For a moment, she didn't move. Then she stepped forward, her voice trembling. You didn't have to do that. He shook his head slowly. Yes, I did, he said, his expression soft but resolute. Or I'd never deserve peace again. The room held its breath. Nicholas offered her a small, almost tentative smile, a man unlearning pride in real time. Thank you, Denise, he said simply. She blinked rapidly, her throat tightening. For what? For reminding me that power means nothing if it costs you your humanity. He gestured gently toward the door, signaling the meeting was over. The staff dispersed slowly, whispers trailing behind them, not of scandal this time, but of respect. As the last person left, Nicholas remained standing by the window, staring out at the skyline that had once represented victory and now only reminded him of consequence. Denise lingered by the door, watching him. You really didn't have to do this, she said again, softer this time. He turned to her, his voice barely above a whisper. You were right, Denise. You can't undo the past. But maybe you can build something better on top of it. Their eyes met, not as employer and maid, but as two people finally seeing each other without walls, without distance. Outside, the city carried on, indifferent, relentless. But inside that glass room, something fundamental had shifted. For the first time in years, Nicholas Gavin didn't feel like a man commanding a company. He felt like a man reclaiming his soul. Denise's voice broke the silence as she turned to leave. You didn't have to do that. Nicholas's reply was quiet, firm, the sound of a man finally learning what redemption feels like. Yes, I did. Or I'd never deserve peace again. The rain had stopped that morning, but the city still glistened as though it were trying to wash away what it couldn't forget. From his office window, Nicholas Gavin watched the streets below, his reflection faint in the glass, tired eyes, loosened tie, and a silence that no deal or meeting could fill. On his desk sat an open folder stamped with a red seal, Gavin Industries Charitable Division. Inside was the authorization for a medical transfer, the payment receipt, and a confidential note from the hospital. Leo Christensen's treatment had been upgraded. New specialists, a private ward, and full coverage under a new health initiative Nicholas had quietly created that morning. No press release. No corporate applause. Just a promise, paid in full. He hadn't told anyone. Not even Henry, who drove him to the hospital the night before. This wasn't for headlines. It was for peace. Nicholas leaned back in his chair, fingers brushing over a photograph he now kept in his drawer, Denise's brother, pale but smiling faintly from his hospital bed. You're going to be okay, kid, he murmured. A knock broke his thoughts. Before he could answer, the door burst open. Denise stood there. No uniform, no meek posture, just a woman trembling with anger and disbelief. Her hair was damp from the drizzle outside, her cheeks flushed. Nicholas, she said, her voice sharp enough to slice through the silence. What did you do? He froze, startled not by her intrusion but by the fire in her tone. Don't, she snapped, stepping forward. Don't tell me you didn't do it. The hospital called. They said Leo's bills were cleared, every last one. The treatment, the new doctor, everything. They said it came from you. Nicholas stood slowly, guilt shadowing his expression. Denise. Why? She demanded, her voice trembling. Why would you do this? You don't owe me anything. For a moment, he didn't answer. He just looked at her, the woman he'd once humiliated in front of a room full of people, now standing tall, unflinching, with more dignity than he'd ever possessed. You're wrong, he said finally, his voice quiet but firm. I owe you everything I thought money could buy. She blinked, stunned. What does that even mean? Nicholas moved around the desk slowly, stopping a few feet away from her. I built this empire thinking success would silence the guilt. That I could buy redemption, for the jobs I took, the lives I appended, the people I failed to see. But when I looked at you, when I realized what I'd done to your family, It broke something I didn't even know was still human. Denise swallowed hard, her voice barely a whisper. My family didn't need your guilt, Nicholas. We needed your humanity. And it came too late. Her words hit like glass. But Nicholas didn't look away. I know, he said softly. That's why I'm not asking for forgiveness. She stared at him, eyes shining with restrained fury and something deeper, something almost sorrowful. Then what are you asking for? Nicholas took a slow breath. For a chance to do one thing right. Just one. Denise let out a bitter laugh. You think paying off hospital bills fixes everything? That it erases what your company did? My father died believing he was worthless. My mother spent her last years wondering if we were cursed. And me. She pointed at herself, tears glinting now. I cleaned the floors of the man who destroyed our lives, because I thought if I worked hard enough, maybe fate would stop punishing us. Nicholas's throat tightened. Denise. I didn't stay because I hated you, she continued, her voice breaking now. I stayed because I hoped you'd see us someday. The room fell utterly still. Nicholas's jaw clenched, his composure cracking like glass under weight. And now I do, he whispered. Denise shook her head, wiping her eyes quickly. You see me because you're ashamed. No, he said, stepping closer. I see you because I was blind before. Because I confused silence for loyalty, fear for respect. Because every time you smiled at my son, or greeted my staff, or stayed up working when no one noticed, you were teaching me what real strength looks like. Her breath hitched, tears streaking her cheeks. You're trying to make this about redemption. But some wounds don't heal with apologies. I know, Nicholas said quietly. But that doesn't mean I'll stop trying. He reached into his pocket and pulled out a folded piece of paper, a worn letter in his father's handwriting. This was from my father, he said. He ran this company before me. When he shut down the factory in your town, he wrote this letter but never sent it. I found it last week. He unfolded it slowly, voice trembling as he read aloud. To those affected by our decision, I hope someday, someone in our family learns that a company isn't made of buildings or stock. It's made of people. If profit becomes our only language, then we'll die fluent in failure. Nicholas lowered the letter, his voice heavy with emotion. I think he wrote that for me. For this moment. Denise's lips parted, her anger faltering as she listened. He stepped closer, gently placing the letter on her palm. You were never invisible, Denise. I just didn't deserve to see you until now. For a moment, she said nothing. The only sound was the faint hum of the city below. Finally, she whispered, you didn't have to do this. Nicholas gave a faint, almost broken smile. Yes, I did. Because you gave me back something I thought I'd lost a long time ago. Her eyes met his, wary, searching. What's that? Belief, he said softly. In goodness. In people. In myself. Denise's chest tightened. The anger she'd carried for so long began to crumble, leaving only exhaustion and something fragile underneath, understanding. She exhaled shakily, her shoulders lowering. You can't buy redemption, Nicholas. I'm not trying to, he replied. I'm trying to earn it, even if it takes the rest of my life. For a long quiet moment, they simply stood there, two people bound by a mistake that had broken them both in different ways. Finally, Nicholas took a small step forward. His voice was barely above a whisper. I see you now, Denise. Her eyes filled with tears again, but this time they didn't fall from pain. They fell from release. He reached out hesitantly, his hand brushing against hers. Not a command, not a plea, just a gesture of sincerity. And she didn't pull away. The late afternoon light streamed through the office windows, painting the room gold, soft, warm, forgiving. For the first time since that awful morning, Denise didn't feel invisible. And for the first time in his life, Nicholas Gavin didn't feel powerful, he felt human. Nicholas takes her hand gently, eyes filled with humility. I see you now, Denise. Weeks passed, but the change was unmistakable. The Gavin mansion, once a place of whispered orders and silent meals, had begun to breathe again. The air no longer carried fear. The staff no longer avoided footsteps echoing down the hall. Laughter, soft, hesitant at first, had started to return. And at the center of it all was Denise Christensen. She still wore her uniform, though Nicholas had insisted she didn't have to. "You're more than that," he'd said gently one morning. But Denise had only smiled. "It's not the uniform that defines me," she'd replied. "It's what I choose to do while wearing it." Now, her steps through the mansion carried quiet authority, the kind that came not from power, but from respect. Even the youngest maids turned to her for guidance. And when Nicholas passed her in the hall, there was no tension, no awkward silence. Just a steady acknowledgement, a shared understanding that could only be born from pain turned into growth. Nicholas Gavin had changed too, in ways no one could have predicted. He had begun holding staff meetings not in the boardroom, but in the open atrium, where sunlight filtered through tall windows. He'd started asking questions that had nothing to do with profit margins. "How's your daughter's school? Is your mother recovering well?" Small questions. Human ones. Henry noticed it first. "You're starting to sound like your father would have wanted," he said one afternoon, polishing the car outside. Nicholas smiled faintly. "No," he replied, glancing toward the mansion where Denise's voice carried softly from the kitchen. "I'm starting to sound like myself, for the first time." The transformation wasn't just personal, it was structural. At a press conference weeks later, Nicholas stood before flashing cameras and unveiled the Gavin Foundation for Industrial Families, a program dedicated to supporting healthcare for families affected by factory-related illnesses. "Too often," he said, voice steady, "we forget that behind every company are people who make it possible. This foundation is not charity. It's accountability and hope." The audience applauded, but Nicholas's gaze drifted to the back of the room, where Denise stood beside Henry and a group of factory workers. She didn't smile, not at first, just watched him with quiet pride. Then, finally, she nodded. It was all the validation he needed. That evening, after the event, Nicholas returned to the mansion. The house felt different now, not just brighter but alive. The scent of baking bread drifted from the kitchen, the faint hum of music echoed from somewhere upstairs. He paused by the grand staircase, noticing something new on the wall, a framed photograph of the factory site. Below it, a small plaque read, "For the families who built what others claimed alone." Denise had hung it there earlier that day. Nicholas ran his thumb over the brass lettering, a deep exhale escaping him. For the first time, the house didn't feel like a museum of mistakes. It felt like home. In his office, the desk was neat as always, but something new caught his eye, a cream-colored envelope, resting exactly where her first one had been months ago. He froze. His name was written across the front in the same looping handwriting. For a long moment, Nicholas simply stared, the echo of memory washing over him. The last time he'd seen that script, it had shattered him. Now it made him feel something else entirely, gratitude. He sat down, opened it carefully, and unfolded the note inside. "Thank you for seeing me. Not as the maid, but as a person." Nicholas read it once. Then again. His eyes softened, a quiet smile ghosting across his lips. He reached for the top drawer of his desk, the one he hadn't opened since the day everything began. Inside lay the original envelope, her first letter, the photograph of Leo, and the note that had rewritten his life. He placed the new one beside it, his hands lingering on both. There was something poetic in the symmetry, how the story that began with accusation ended with acknowledgement. How the woman he'd once silenced had given him the final word, and yet it was hers that mattered most. He leaned back in his chair, the city lights flickering beyond the window. His reflection overlapped with the faint outlines of two envelopes, one born of shame, the other of grace. And for the first time, Nicholas didn't see the billionaire who'd once ruled through fear. He saw a man, flawed, changed, forgiven in ways he could never repay. The office door creaked softly, and Denise appeared in the doorway, holding a stack of papers. "I didn't mean to interrupt," she said. "You're not," Nicholas replied, rising to his feet. "You never are." Her gaze drifted to the drawer he'd just closed. "You read it." He nodded, his voice quiet. "Every word." She hesitated. "I wasn't sure if I should leave it." "I'm glad you did." They stood there in the golden hue of the setting sun, the silence between them no longer heavy, just full. Finally, Denise smiled. "You've built something good, Nicholas. Not just the foundation. The people. The heart of this place." He returned her smile, small but real. "It wasn't me. It was what you taught me." She tilted her head. And what was that? That sometimes the ones we overlook are the ones holding everything together. Her eyes softened, and for a brief wordless moment, the weight of the past seemed to lift, replaced by quiet understanding. Then she turned to go, her steps light, sure. Nicholas watched her disappear down the hall, the echo of her footsteps fading into the hum of a home reborn. He sat again, looking around the office that had once been a chamber of pride and loneliness. Now it was something else, a place of memory, humility, and promise. He let out a slow breath, the kind that comes when you finally stop fighting the ghosts that live inside you. Outside, the rain had started again, soft, cleansing, steady. Nicholas opened the window slightly, letting the sound drift in. It didn't feel like punishment anymore. It felt like renewal. He glanced once more at the drawer, where both letters rested side by side, 2 chapters of the same story, one of guilt, the other of grace. And for the first time in years, he whispered, almost to himself, "Thank you." His voice was barely audible, but it didn't matter. The house heard him. It was no longer silent. It had found its heartbeat again.
And that, my beautiful family, is how a man who thought he had everything realized he had nothing without compassion. Nicholas built an empire of glass, power, pride, and walls so high no one could reach him. But it took one quiet woman, a maid named Denise, to show him that real worth isn't found in wealth or titles, but in the courage to care. She lost everything and still chose grace. He had everything and finally chose heart. And together, they found redemption in the smallest, simplest truth, that kindness never goes unseen, even when the world looks away. So if you've ever felt overlooked, unheard, or dismissed, remember this: your light matters. The world may not always thank you, but someone somewhere is healing because of your quiet strength. If this story touched your heart, click subscribe, type "I choose kindness" in the comments, and tell me where you're watching from. Because stories like this, stories of grace, forgiveness, and second chances, are reminders that even after heartbreak, humanity can rise again. Until next time, this is Mr. Crown Stories, reminding you, you are seen, you are worthy, and you are the heartbeat this world still needs.